How can libertarians take on the duopoly and win? Let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, happy Thursday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show. Thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you live from our Stratus IP studios here in lovely Eastern Indiana. Don't let cyber attacks or outdated business technology put your company at risk. Learn more at briannicholsshow.com/Stratus IP. Stratus IP, business technology simplified. Folks, libertarians are underdogs. The game, it's rigged against us. The Republicans and Democrats, they have colluded by effectively preventing any third party from really having any chance at winning. So what should we do? Is it hopeless? Should we just give up? Well, we're going to discuss that on today's episode. But first, we're going to go ahead and give a shout out to today's sponsor, and that is our friends over at the Libertarian Party of Illinois. Folks, yeah, very topical for today's episode, folks. If you are up in the great state of Illinois and you want to not just find a third party, but a better party, please head to lpillinois.org and join the Libertarian Party of Illinois, who is helping move, the libertarians in Illinois and the rest of Illinois in a more libertarian direction. The LP of Illinois believes that everyone owns themselves and that no bureaucrat knows better than what you need or what you want. When peaceful people engage in voluntary cooperation, the most number of people are served. And if you agree, help us restore liberty in Illinois at lpillinois.org and bring back peace and liberty in our lifetimes. One more time, lpillinois.org. All right, libertarians, let's talk about this. So, yeah, the good news, underdogs, they win all the time. David beat Goliath. Washington beat the British Empire. Trump, he beat Hillary. The Viet Kong, they beat the U.S. military. Microsoft beat IBM. Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. Heck, Nigel Farage helped beat and take down the European Union. Yeah, it's essential lessons that libertarians, we must learn from these in order to have any semblance of success. And that's why I thought it was very important for us to go back to an awesome episode we had at the end of 2020 with good friend Curt Libertarian from Checkmate the State over on his awesome Substack. And he did this very article, Guerilla Politics. How can libertarians take on the duopoly and win? We're going to go ahead and check out that argument right now. So with that being said, on to the show, Curt Libertarian here on the Brian Nichols Show.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Curt, thank you first and foremost for joining us here on the Brian Nichols Show. And my goodness, my friend, you are always up to no good, or at the very least, you're up to some libertarian good over on Twitter and all social media. You're fighting the good fight, and I think you're doing the thing that a lot of libertarians have trouble with, and that is being able to articulate what it means to be a libertarian, what libertarian policies are in terms of impacting real people in their real lives. So first and foremost, Curt, you've built up a pretty nice following over on social media. I know if I were to go over to your Twitter, you have around 20,000+ followers. So you're speaking to people and they're hearing what you're saying and they're liking what you're saying. So what do you think? So how about this? Let's start off here. What brought you into this libertarian world that you find yourself in, number one? Number two, what is it that you're speaking to that people are finding themselves really resonating and sticking around and listening to you about?
Oh, that's a good question. So, like, my story for becoming a libertarian, I would probably give the most credit actually to Donald Trump for turning me into a libertarian, just because, I always considered myself kind of a libertarian-leaning Republican before that. I liked Ron Paul. I voted for him in the primaries, but I didn't join the revolution. But when Donald Trump came on the scene, I was kind of like, okay, maybe I'm not a Republican anymore. I'm not sure what it was about him that spurred me to think that. So, but I decided to look into it and say, maybe I'm a full-blown libertarian. So went out there and really dug deep into what libertarian philosophy was, and found out that, yeah, this is where I'm at. This makes the most sense for me. So as far as what I'm speaking to with people, I'm not sure. It was it's kind of as surprising to me as it is to anybody else that I've built the following that I have. It's just that I spend way too much time on Twitter. I think that might be a big part of it. But definitely my focus is on trying to take somewhat complicated concepts, because libertarianism, we do deal with nuanced arguments and
right.
Maybe counterintuitive ideas, and try and make them a little bit more understandable and applicable to what's going on, and making sure that they make sense to someone who hasn't read Milton Friedman and Murray Rothbard and listened to every Tom Woods episode and things like that. So that's kind of what my focus is on.
For sure. And I guess, looking at where we are right now as a movement, we're still kind of licking some wounds from 2020. And I say that, I'm not trying to poke fun at candidate Jo Jorgensen, Dr. Jo Jorgensen. I think she's a fantastic lady. I think she's obviously a great libertarian, but I'm not sure if she was a great necessarily candidate for libertarian ideals. And it's interesting because I know despite I've had her on the show multiple times. I think she's a great lady. I think we're seeing across the board she wasn't really wasn't really inspiring enthusiasm in the base like we were hoping to see in a candidate this year. And we had a lot of folks now kind of trying to figure out what is the next step for the Libertarian Party. Do we go more towards an activist, somebody who's a radical activist, or do we go back towards, somebody who's more of a traditional politician or at least elected official who has that resume built up? I'm saying, we need to do a two-party, or a two-part approach rather, not two-party necessarily, but it could include two-party, don't mind you, because I'm much more on board with using the GOP and the Democratic parties as a vessel if we can get liberty ideas into action. So, You went ahead, you have a Substack, and it's a fantastic read over at, it's Checkmate the State. And the article, we went, I think, kind of viral. It was Guerilla Politics, How Libertarians Can Take on the Duopoly and Win. And that right there is the key that we have been really dropping the ball on, is the win part, right? We're all good about, talking a big game against the Republican and Democratic duopoly, but we've been not doing a successful job in actually getting libertarians, number one, into office, and number two, libertarian, I say small L libertarian policy into action. So let's kind of start off here, Curt. You decided to write this awesome article, Guerilla Politics, and it's a phenomenal read. It's unfortunately, at length, something that I know we cannot even begin to dig into as much as we deserve to in the confines of the program. So I'm going to be including the link so folks can go ahead and give it a read, afterwards. Or if they want to pause right here, go ahead and give it a read. But let's kind of do the quick Spark Notes overview of Guerilla Politics. What got you writing this article, and really, what was the main focus of this article? How libertarians can actually take on the duopoly and win?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the reason you asked me to come on the show earlier is because a lot of people were having the attitude that you were just discussing on Twitter, that, hey, Jo Jorgensen was maybe a bit of a disappointment in terms of the vote total. And the whole time I was just like taking a victory lap for saying it was exactly what needed to happen, which was surprising a lot of people. But the reason I was saying that it was a victory lap is because I originally, before we even ran, I thought that the purpose of running her in the election was to spoil the election for the candidate. So and she did get enough votes to cover the span between the two the two main candidates, which means she accomplished what I was hoping she would do. Right, she got enough votes in those key main battleground states to spoil the election. And so that was what prompted me to write it. Is a lot of people were asking, hey, spoiling the election, how is that a victory for libertarians? So that's really what I wanted to accomplish, is to explain the thought process and the reasoning behind why I think that's such a victory for us, and why we didn't lose in 2016 or 2020. We accomplished what we needed to, and now we just need to leverage that status that we have as spoilers to get the policy wins that we need.
So I know when we go to look at your Substack in this article, again, Guerilla Politics, the one of the reasons, and you go through a step-by-step reason of why libertarians always fail. I'm going to read quickly here. You say, many libertarians have abandoned the idea of victory through the political system. They look at failure of past political efforts and conclude it's hopeless. They are right if we keep doing the same thing. With a few exceptions, libertarians have followed a single political strategy. Step 1, convert people to libertarianism. Step 2, win elections. Step 3, change policy. This strategy has always failed, and it will always fail. So, instead of reading further, Curt, why? Why will it always fail?
Well, so the narrow point of, or the broader point, I guess, of the article that I wrote is that libertarians are underdogs, right? The whole system is stacked against us, and we can list all the reasons that the system is stacked against us. There are many, many reasons. But the point is that in whether we're talking war, whether we're talking business, sports, politics, underdogs win all the time. And the point that I'm making is we need to look at those underdog wins and see what they did that set them apart from any other from other underdogs that lost. And the main things that I came away with is there's 3 things that they did that are really successful. One is they never challenged the opponents on their terms, right? Like, I mean, an example I give is George Washington, right? When he tried to fight the British the way that the British wanted to fight, lined up with uniforms and shooting across the field, he always lost, right? But when he took on those guerrilla tactics, when he went across a river and on Christmas at night, attacking some like obscure outpost or something like that, that's where he got his greatest victories, right? So he never challenged those opponents on their own terms when he won. Another really important thing is just to find and exploit our opponent's weaknesses, and the other one is find unofficial rules. Like I definitely am not advocating that we break official rules to get this done, but unofficial rules that are out there to break those to give us an advantage, right? Mm-hmm. And so the problem with those that policy or that strategy that you laid out is it does none of those things, right? If we're saying, hey, step 1 to us having success is to convert people to libertarianism, that's really playing on our opponent's our opponent's own terms, and it's putting us in a position where we're at a disadvantage, right? They have control of the media, they have control of the education system, they have control of the current political system. So trying to go out and convert people when the cards are stacked against us that much, that's just asking for failure, right? Even winning elections, right? We're talking about all the things that are stacked against us. They won't even let us in debates, much less, it's just a huge challenge just to get ballot access in some states. There's just so many things that the duopoly has been able to rig the game against us. And so, again, we're challenging them on their own terms when we do that as well. And then the third thing, once, let's say somehow we're able to pull all that off and get, let's say, next election, we get the Justin Amash elected by some miracle, right? Even in that situation, there's a lot of things that are in place to prevent us from even changing the policy, right? So the question that I have is, how can we change the way that we look at it? How can we kind of throw out that old policy or that old strategy of converting people to libertarianism, winning elections, and changing policy? Is there a way that we can bypass steps? Is there a way that we can, maybe find some weaknesses in the current election system that we can exploit to go ahead and get policy wins without following any of those steps? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So, you start to just touch on this in the article. You say, I want to be perfectly clear. The only strategy that'll work for libertarians is, number 1, focus maniacally, and this is what we were just talking about, on changing policy at the expense of everything else. Now, this is where I'm gonna question you a little bit, right? Because I'm curious here. You say, yes, even at the expense of winning elections or changing hearts and minds. So I ask you, Curt, how can we do both? How can we change policy that's, I guess, for the positive, and at the same point in time not win over said hearts and minds along the way with said policy? Because I guess this is my fear, right? And I'll set the premise for this entire, I don't disagree at all with the point, but if you were to go against the overlying, majority kind of opinion, I think it opens the door for kickback. I think it opens the door for some resentment. at the behest, just that this was not an across the board decision. It feels like it was forced from the top down in a kind of sneaky kind of way. And I think it might ruin trust, which now in sales, one of the biggest things I'm focused on is building trust. So I guess that's where my number one red flag kind of came out. And I was reading your article here on Guerilla Politics. So help me out there with this maniacally focusing on changing policy at the expense of everything else.
So yeah, no, that is a completely valid point. And the truth is, making the duopoly resent us is actually kind of the point of spoiling the election, right? It's finding leverage against them to use against them is what the strategy basically is. And if you think about it, I mean, that is really how policy has changed, right? You don't really see a lot of examples of situations where the voters just wanted a change made, right? They voted in the right people, and then the policy changed because of that. Really, when you see policy change, it's because a small group of people gain leverage over people in power and use that leverage to get the policy change, right? So I think that's kind of the way that we need to look at it. Now I do realize that changing hearts and minds, that is going to be an important thing to do. It's not as though we can do this without any libertarians, but I think we've put ourselves in a mindset where whenever we're thinking strategy, the default thought process that we go to is we're thinking, okay, what's the strategy to make more people into libertarians? And I really want to get us out of that default thought process where when we're saying, when we're asking what strategy should we pursue, we're saying what strategy should we pursue to actually get some policy wins, instead of just thinking in that narrow way, what strategy are we going to pursue to turn people into libertarians, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because one of the things you're touching on, I think, is more like the Young Americans for Liberty approach, right? So I've just had Cliff Maloney on the show back here a couple weeks ago, and Young Americans for Liberty, I mean, they go out and they knock doors, and the number that Cliff gave me, it still blows me away every time I talk about it. 1 out of every 9 doors they knock, they're going to go ahead and get a vote for their candidate, and they're doing a majority of their door knocking for GOP candidates, but that's not simply because they only support GOP candidates, because they're supporting really GOP candidates as a vessel to enact liberty policy. Now, are they all pure libertarians? No. And I honestly, when I talked about this with Cliff in the show, we both laughed because do we expect them to be pure libertarians? And I don't think anybody should be expecting anybody to be a pure libertarian across the board when we're talking about electoral politics. But to your point, it is interesting because if we were able to enact these liberty policies in these kind of covert ways, yes, it's not necessarily maybe libertarians, big L libertarians, that are winning the elections, but rather it's these small L libertarians that we are kind of sneaking into the traditional big, two-party systems. And that's kind of the approach. I do hear the merit, and I've heard it before. We should be trying to infiltrate these two big parties going forward to get some libertarian ideas at the very least as an alternative to whatever the mainstream is in those respective communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a saying, and I wish I knew who to attribute it to, that in a constitutional system like we have, you coalition before elections, and then in a parliamentary system, you coalition after elections, right? And I think that's really true. That's the way it works. Like if you look at the Republicans, they're a coalition of maybe like religious right, maybe some populist elements, some libertarian elements, maybe some neocons. If you look at the Democrats, they have progressives and Hillary Clinton style liberals and college elites, things like that. They've each created a coalition, and really, I actually think of the LP, and I'm a fan of the LP. I think it's a really valuable resource for us to use. But I think that the value of the LP is actually more to get the most that we can out of the parties before we go ahead and coalition with them, right? There's a lot of negotiating power that comes from holding off from joining a coalition. And so this really, one way to look at the strategy that I lay out here is just a way for us to get as much concessions from them as possible before we go ahead and coalition with one of those parties. And to your point about the Young Americans for Liberty, I actually call them out specifically in the article.
Yes, you do.
As a really great example of someone of a group that's following the strategy of not challenging the opponents on their own terms and kind of breaking unofficial rules. And they've had tremendous success. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to be really a great two-pronged approach, to have, the Libertarian Party in the background working to get the most before we go ahead and coalition with one of the parties, and also to have Young Americans for Liberty working within the party to a certain degree to go ahead and have really great libertarian candidates to take over, at that point when we go ahead and decide to coalition with them,
right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. And now when you're talking about challenging the duopoly on their terms, this is specifically the examples you're referring to, right? Like actually going in, having these liberty primaries in, the Republican Party, forcing, I think of the Dave Bratt situation, where he took down Eric Cantor. And, I'm not saying Dave Bratt was a, libertarian icon by any stretch, but, to look, that's how the approach should be done. Is that kind of your point here with challenging the duopoly on their terms?
Yeah. So challenging the duopoly on their terms, what I think of is a situation where we're going in and we're playing politics the way that we're expected to play politics, right? We're saying, hey, our goal is to get the maximum number of votes that we can for our candidates. We're, begging the two parties to allow us into the debates. And we're kind of accepting the terms that they've laid out, that in order to have any power, we need to have, 51% of the electorate vote for us, right? Well, when I say we need to change the way that we the way that we play the game, the way that we challenge them, and not challenge them on their terms, I'm saying what we need to do is we need to really focus on actually just spoiling the election, right? Because the strategy that you're going to use in that situation is going to be very different, right? If you are seeking to spoil the election for a president, you're going to be campaigning in swing states. You're going to be focusing the messaging on maybe attracting specific demographic groups to bring into the coalition. And whereas if you look at a situation where you're saying, hey, let's maximize votes, things you might do is go do a national tour, maybe do a sales pitch like, hey, if you're not in one of the swing states, vote for me. If you are in one of the swing states, go ahead and vote for one of the major candidates, which was actually a message that we got out of the party at in a few instances during the election. So I think that's what I'm referring to is let's focus on getting that leverage by spoiling the elections instead of just seeking to maximize the amount of votes that we get, if that makes sense.
So, it does. And now to point 3, find and ruthlessly exploit political weaknesses. Now, if we're looking at our friends on the left, I would say more libertarians that listen to the Brian Nichols Show tend to be in that conservatarian camp. I think that's fair to say at the very least. But with that being said, we can go after the folks on the left pretty easy, but it is sometimes difficult to look inward and go after some folks that we would say are potential allies. So I guess when we're looking at the Republican Party, are we looking at specifically those that would be like the quote unquote most like non-friendly to liberty? So if I were to look in Republican world, for example, right? Like I would want to, instead of focusing my time on let's say Rand Paul, spend that time focusing on a Lindsey Graham or a Tom Cotton or Marco Rubio.
So actually the strategy that I would go after is I really think the biggest weakness is actually in the presidential election, right?
Gotcha,
because
okay.
You're going to have 150 million people that are going to be voting in that election. But a real serious weakness that they have is that if you can peel 100,000 votes away from the incumbent candidate in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Florida, right? You've just changed the outcome of the election, and you haven't won the election, right? You've only gotten a few 100,000 votes, but you have put yourself in really a position of power. You've put yourself in a position where you are the kingmaker, right? You're the people that get to decide who the next president is going to be, and to a certain degree. And like I said, we're already to the point where we've done that, right? We've already covered the difference between the votes that Joe Biden and Donald Trump got in the last election. And so we already have that core competency. We can do some things to make ourselves a little bit more effective at spoiling the election, to make it a little bit more obvious to the two parties that we're the reason that they lost the election. But the next core competency that we need to have is to leverage that status as a spoiler to go ahead and get policy wins out of the two parties, and in exchange for coalitioning with them, right? We're getting the most possible leverage by spoiling the election, and then we're offering to say, hey, we'll go ahead and coalition with you once you do the things that we're asking, once you implement the policies that we're outlining for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's funny you're starting to talk about this, because I was going to say I usually do this after the show, but I need to make an introduction, because if you have not talked to Chris Spangle over at the Big Channel yet, so that's kind of the approach that Chris took in a local perspective in Indiana, and now Indiana libertarian politics is probably the most influential libertarian in, I would say, the United States from a state level, to the point that they're actually having real say on policy positions from a state perspective through the governor's mansion. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And that was all because Chris really was really focusing on being that alternative and exploiting those different weaknesses as the alternative with the Libertarian Party. So going to step 4, break the unofficial rules of politics whenever it gives us an advantage. That does not mean, however, we break the official rules. In fact, it is essential that we follow those election rules perfectly. So I'm guessing when we say break the unofficial rules of politics, right, we're talking about these kind of rules that are set by the two party the true traditional parties, like looking at the presidential debates, right? It's just the two parties that are up there. You don't have the third party. So maybe a libertarian having a live stream alternative to the debates. Is that kind of something that you're saying as breaking these unofficial rules is really just trying to upset the apple cart?
Well, so I think, and this goes back to the point that I was making earlier about how the focus, we're maybe a little too focused on the attracting people to become libertarians, as opposed to focusing on turning or using the leverage they already have to get policy wins. Right? In that example that you gave me, that is an example of someone breaking the rules in order to spread the message a little bit, right? That's step 1 of our normal strategy. But really what I want to be thinking about is breaking some unofficial rules in order to get some of those policy wins, right? So in the article, I actually give an analogy of David and Goliath, right? Goliath, when he went out and challenged the Israelites to single combat, he was expecting someone to come out and fight him with a sword or a spear, right? Because that's the unofficial rule, right? When you fight someone in single combat, you fight hand to hand. And David didn't care about the unofficial rule. He just showed up with a sling and hit a Goliath in the head, right? It was almost like bringing a gun to a knife fight, right?
Yeah.
So he broke that unofficial rule and he ended up winning. And so I really want us to be thinking about ways that we can do that. And really what I'm thinking when I say break an unofficial rule is, again, I'm saying let's stop focusing on getting the maximum number of votes, right? That's a kind of an unofficial rule in politics. When you run a politician, your goal is to get the maximum number of votes. Let's instead focus on spoiling the election, because like I said, that strategy is very different than the strategy that you would use if you were seeking to get the maximum number of votes. And then, like I said, the second unofficial rule that I would have is, offering to go ahead and coalition with those other sides once they go ahead and meet our policy demands, in a sense. That would be the second thing that I would do, is use that leverage to get those policy wins out of the two major parties.
Can I give some pushback now? Because I have to be a little bit of a pain in the butt every now and then.
Of course.
So with this,
Of course.
I had a little bit of another red flag, right? So doesn't number 4, if we're now trying to promote it from a liberty, like getting actually policy in perspective, getting enacted, could it not maybe go in conflict with number 1 if we end up getting non-liberty focused candidates elected as a result of our spoiling? So for example, right, let's say we have a candidate running as a hyper progressive against Thomas Massey, and a libertarian who is like a 99.99% libertarian over Thomas Massey's 97% libertarian, decides to go against Massey, and in there being a spoiler on those, 2%, if that, differences with Massey, that they end up pulling enough of the vote from Massey that the progressive candidate wins and yields a net negative in terms of actually getting liberty enacted for that respective community. Couldn't that necessarily be a means of not getting policy being changed at the expense of everything else?
Well, no, actually, I think the point that you're making is a very good one, but I actually think that is more of a concern under the existing framework that we have right now, because again, our thought process is, hey, let's build the party, let's get the most that we can in terms of getting the biggest election turnout, the most votes for our candidates. We're not thinking in terms of, hey, what can we do from a maybe thinking out of the box standpoint to get the best results possible. So under this framework, again, the focus is, let's coalition with the major parties as soon as we're in a situation where it makes sense, right? That's something that we're going to really incorporate into the LP's policy. And that is a perfectly legitimate position or situation where I would want a coalition with the major parties, right? If they're nominating someone like a Rand Paul or a Thomas Massey, that's a very good reason for us to say, okay, it's time for the Libertarian Party to go ahead and suspend our campaign and throw our support behind this very libertarian-minded candidate. And with the current framework that the party has, I don't think that would be a decision that they would make, right? It's the focus is on building the party instead of getting the policy done that we want to. Does that make sense?
I laugh because we had the former chairman saying that if Dick Cheney ran as a libertarian, that he would endorse that, and because it would get more votes for the Libertarian Party, which I get is the job of the chairman's role, which I don't necessarily agree being the goal of the Libertarian Party necessarily just to get votes, but actually, what's the goal? And I think it's to enact liberty, right? And that's why I'm much more friendly with using alternative means, being like the GOP or the Democratic Party. I understand that actually goes right into number 5 of your final step-by-step process here in your Guerilla Politics article in Substack, and that is gain leverage over politicians and exercise that leverage to get policy wins. And again, I think it goes, kind of full circle. That's exactly what we've been talking about, is, having kind of that spoiler role to either get them to come to the table and actually have a conversation, hear your points out, or you'll continue to spoil these elections and yield more, I guess, resentment or dissatisfaction with the existing status quo system, and push people to maybe look at alternatives. Is that a fair summary of step 5?
Well, I mean, the way that I look at it is, I think that the existing two parties have basically they've kind of found a hack for democracy in a sense, where they've discovered that they don't really have to do anything good. All they have to do is scare their base that the other side is terrible, right? And so as long as they know that all they have to do is say, hey, Donald Trump is a fascist, or hey, Joe Biden is, in the pocket of AOC and the radical left, and do nothing of value for their constituents, nothing is going to be done, right? And so I think of this as kind of a way to restore, that leverage that voters have in a way to get policy in exchange for their vote, right? So the sales pitch that we make to people is, hey, withhold your vote from the politician this time around, right? Because they haven't done anything for you, and they're not going to do anything for you as long as they think that they can get away with it just by scaring you. And vote for the Libertarian candidate, because that will give them an idea of the reason why you withheld your vote. That'll give them a reason to know what direction they need to move in order to earn your vote. And then once they go ahead and start doing what they need to, once they figure out that they can't just come to you and say the other guy's a fascist to earn your vote, then you can go ahead and give your vote to them, right? But they need to actually earn your vote. They need to do what we're asking them to do to restore liberty and to promote prosperity, instead of just scaring us about the other guy, if that makes sense. So it's a way to restore leverage to the voter instead of to the special interests.
Yep. No, for sure. Man, Curt, we could go on, man. This is so well written and well thought out. Now, there's definitely a little bit from like the sales pitch of stuff that I think you and I off air we can refine and tool. But I think overall this is a great. I mean, honestly, this is a great starting off point. I think for folks who are looking for an alternative to what has really been the status quo playbook from the greater liberty political arm. So with that being said, obviously, Checkmate the State, a fantastic read for your Substack, Guerilla Politics. Curt, it's Checkmate the State. Where else can folks go ahead and follow you? Obviously on Twitter, but other social media and so forth.
Yeah, so Twitter is definitely the main place to find me. My handle is just Checkmate State. No the in the Twitter handle, but feel free to give a follow and read the article and see what it is that we're talking about, because it does lay out the process that I have in mind. And to your point that you made earlier, that's a really good point. This is a rough draft. I lay out the strategy that I think makes the most sense, and the tactics that we can use to leverage that strategy. But any feedback that we have, any ways that we can refine it to make it work better, that the more that we have input from other people, the better the strategy is going to work if we actually can get it implemented. So I appreciate any feedback that anybody gives.
Absolutely. Well, hey, that's how the market works, right? Like we go by, we put the product on the marketplace, and then people tell us what they like, what they don't like, what they think will work, what they don't think will work, and then we test it, and then we see, well, did the product work? Did it flop? Did the strategy work? Did it flop? And then we can learn from it. And then it's a very quirky bumper sticker saying, but mistakes are proof you're trying. And hey, we have a lot of bruises as libertarians. We have a lot of mistakes, and it shows we've tried. Now it's to learn from those mistakes, right? That now it's the next step. And I think this is a great next step here. With that being said, so Curt, I will include the link to this amazing Substack read, Guerilla Politics, and I'll include the link to your social media, so it's easier for folks to go ahead and follow you over on Twitter. With that being said, Curt, I think this is the first of many episodes of you joining us here on the Brian Nichols Show to come. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for inviting me.
Alrighty, folks, that's going to wrap up our throwback episode there with Curt Libertarian. How can we take on the state, the duopoly, and win? Well, we do so by Guerilla Politics. If you enjoyed today's episode, well, please do me a favor. Go ahead and give today's episode a share. When you do, tag Curt and tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. And by the way, folks, we are reaching quite literally tens of thousands of folks every single month here at the Brian Nichols Show. So please, if you are getting value from the program, I want to hear about it. Email me, brian@briannicholsshow.com, or share your thoughts with the world. Give us a 5-star rating and review over wherever it is you get your podcast. But specifically, if you could do me a favor, go to either briannicholsshow.com/reviews or Apple Podcasts. Either way, 5 stars. Tell us why you get value from the program and what keeps you coming back each and every episode. And by the way, yes, so this is the first day of December. I'm just going to give you guys a heads up. Come January, some stuff's going to be changing. Yeah, we're going to have a couple of changes here and there. Nothing major, I promise, but a little tinkering. And more so, it's because we're changing the show a little bit. We're growing. We're seeing more and more value being asked of from you guys. And to be frank, in order to do that, we have to do a little bit of things differently here. So with that, yes, we're going to be changing a few things, adding a few monetized options. And guys, it's going to be a great change because it's also going to open up a lot of opportunity for us to help you guys where you guys have been asking for some help. And by the way, one of the areas we are already starting off, and I'm so excited, we're already getting candidates excited and entering into our new course, and it is Candidate School 101 over on our Patreon. So yes, if you head over to briannicholsshow.com/candidate school, you can sign up. Now, this is not just for everybody. This is for people who are either A, already tossing their hat in the ring to run for office, and I'm specifically talking to you folks in the GOP and LP. If you're in the Liberty world, come talk to us. That's number one. Or number two, you're thinking about it. You're like, I don't know if this is if it's for me, and even maybe if it is, what do I need to do? What are the basics? We're going to talk about that. Fundraising, messaging. How do you meet your voters where they're at on the issues they care about? All that and more. Plus, we're going to be going ahead, having roundtable conversations with elected officials, current candidates, and more. So if you want to go ahead and sign up for, which I think is a very needed resource, and I've been hearing from you guys, it absolutely is a needed resource. Less than $10 a month, $9.95. You can go ahead and get involved in a part of our candidate school over on our Patreon. So I'll include that link here in the show notes, and you can check that out if you are joining us here over on our video version of the show, which you can find over on YouTube, Rumble, and on Odyssey. If you're joining us here on YouTube, do me a favor, go ahead right here below, hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell so you're not missing a single time we go live. And also, if you're joining us here on the YouTube version of the show, I will make sure I include yesterday's conversation where I went through and I outlined the 5 ways you can instantly become more persuasive and improve your communication skills overnight. Yeah, we talked about that. So I'll include that link right here below. But otherwise, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, beyond giving it a share, beyond giving us a rating and review, I'm going to ask you to do me one more solid, and that is, please go ahead and give us some support. If you don't want to necessarily run for office, but you still want to support the show, you can do so either $5 a month or a one-time donation, your choice, whatever you can do. I appreciate it because this is what keeps the lights on. And frankly, it's what allows us to keep doing this. So if you're getting some value, well, I'd really appreciate it because it helps us, bring more value for you guys and leave you guys educated, enlightened, and informed. So with that being said, it's all I have for you today. Tomorrow we have a great episode in store. And plus, we have so many episodes lined up here this weekend to be airing for next week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever it is you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And if you listen to the Brian Nichols Show, go ahead and share your reviews here. I saw Spotify is going through and doing their end of year summary. So if you listen to the Brian Nichols Show, I'd love to see your stats. So with that being said, thank you for joining us. Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you tomorrow.
Listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.